"I'm closing the shop," said 76-year-old Hank Wilson, holding his last customer's payment in his hand. Main Street had emptied out. Everyone was going to the modern barbers at the new mall. "Nobody needs me anymore." At that moment, a young journalist entered through the door and froze while looking at an old photograph on the wall. "Sir, is that soldier in this photo you?" What they didn't know was that within minutes, this question would change the entire town, and Hank Wilson's hidden past would shock everyone. But before we dive into this incredible story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced or witnessed something like this, share it in the comments below. If you want to be the first to hear about more inspiring stories like this one, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Millbrook, Kentucky, population exactly 3,200 souls, is nestled in rolling hills where time seems to move at its own gentle pace. Main Street stretches for half a mile, lined with buildings that have witnessed decades of American history unfold. This is the kind of place where neighbors don't bother knocking before entering each other's homes, where the local diner serves coffee that's been brewing since dawn, and where everyone gathers on wide front porches each evening to discuss the day's events over glasses of sweet tea. The town follows an unhurried rhythm that city folks find both charming and bewildering. Mornings begin at 6 a.m. sharp when Rosie's Diner opens its doors, filling with farmers, retirees, and early risers who've been starting their days with the same cup of coffee and slice of pie for the past 20 years. By noon, the conversation shifts to Main Street Grill, where the lunch crowd dissects local politics, high school football prospects, and whose garden is producing the best tomatoes this season. Right in the heart of Main Street, occupying the same corner spot it has claimed since 1952, stands Wilson Barber Shop. The building itself tells a story: red brick weathered by decades of Kentucky seasons, large windows that have watched 4 generations grow up, and that iconic red, white, blue striped barber pole that has spun endlessly for over 70 years. The faded sign in the window, painted by hand in careful script, reads, "Haircuts, shaves, beard trims, walk-ins welcome." Step through that glass door and you're transported back to The vintage leather barber chair, deep burgundy and worn smooth by countless customers, sits like a throne in the center of the room. 3 antique mirrors with ornate brass frames reflect decades of conversations, confessions, and life stories. The black and white checkered linoleum floor has been scrubbed clean every evening for 50 years, though it shows the gentle wear of time around the chair's base where generations have rested their feet. Henry Hank Wilson, now 76 years old, unlocks that same glass door at exactly 7:30 a.m. every morning, just as he has for the past 50 years. His routine never varies. First the lights, then the radio, followed by a careful cleaning of his tools laid out with military precision on the counter beside the chair. His movements are deliberate, economical, shaped by decades of discipline that most people in Millbrook have never questioned or understood. Hank himself appears to be exactly what you'd expect from a small-town barber approaching his 8th decade. His hair, once thick and dark, has turned the color of fresh snow, combed neatly to the side each morning without fail. His face bears the deep lines earned through a lifetime of genuine smiles, worried frowns, and concentrated focus as he worked around ears and trimmed sideburns to perfection. His hands, slightly gnarled with age but remarkably steady, move with the confidence of someone who has performed the same skilled tasks thousands upon thousands of times. But there's something different about Hank's posture, something that sets him apart from other men his age. His back remains straight as a board, his shoulders square, his walk purposeful even when crossing the small shop. When he speaks, it's with a measured cadence, choosing words carefully, never wasting breath on unnecessary chatter. His eyes, pale blue and alert, have a quality that suggests they've seen more than most, though he's never offered details about what that might be. For decades, Hank Wilson was the keeper of Millbrook's masculine traditions. Every man and boy in town made their way to his chair eventually. Little boys got their first haircuts here, usually with their fathers holding their hands and promising ice cream afterward. Teenagers came in asking for the latest styles they'd seen in magazines, leaving satisfied with Hank's interpretation that somehow looked both modern and respectable enough for their parents' approval. Young men preparing for their wedding day trusted Hank to make them look their absolute best, often booking appointments weeks in advance for such important occasions. But like so many small American towns, Millbrook began changing in ways that couldn't be stopped or slowed. The transformation started gradually, almost imperceptibly, but gathered momentum until it became an unstoppable force reshaping everything that had once seemed permanent. 5 years ago, developers broke ground on Millbrook Commons, a sprawling shopping complex 15 miles outside town. The gleaming new development promised convenience, variety and modernity that Main Street simply couldn't match. Among its anchor stores was Platinum Cuts, a sleek barbershop and salon featuring neon lighting, contemporary music, young stylists with perfectly sculpted hair, and social media accounts showcasing their latest creations. The younger generation of Millbrook men discovered they could get not just a haircut, but a style consultation, complete with product recommendations and tutorials on maintaining their new look. They could book appointments online, pay with contactless cards, and share photos of their transformation on Instagram. The experience felt contemporary, connected, relevant in ways that Hank's shop with its vintage everything and analog approach simply couldn't compete with. The exodus happened slowly at first. A few of the younger guys stopped coming in, then their friends followed, then their younger brothers. High school boys who had grown up in Hank's chair suddenly found excuses to drive out to Platinum Cuts instead. Even some of the middle-aged men, curious about what they might be missing, started making the trip to the new place. Hank watched his customer base shrink from an average of 15 to 20 men per day to maybe 8 to 10, then down to 5 to 6, and finally to the point where some days he'd open the shop, clean his tools, listen to the radio and close 12 hours later without cutting a single head of hair. The mathematics were simple and unforgiving. Fewer customers meant less income, which meant difficulty paying rent, utilities, and the basic costs of keeping the business alive. What Hank couldn't have anticipated was how quickly the broader economic forces would accelerate Millbrook's transformation. The shopping complex didn't just hurt his business, it began pulling customers away from every Main Street establishment. The old hardware store couldn't compete with the big box retailers. The family-owned clothing shop couldn't match the selection and prices of chain stores. One by one, the businesses that had anchored downtown Millbrook for generations began closing their doors permanently. That Tuesday started like any other, with Hank performing his morning ritual of opening the shop, arranging his tools, and settling in for what he hoped would be a productive day. But as he looked out his window, the reality of the situation hit him with a finality he could no longer ignore. Millbrook Cafe, the breakfast spot that had been serving coffee and conversation since 1948, had joined the ranks of the departed. Their for rent sign seemed to mock the optimism that had kept Hank going through the lean months. Johnson's Shoe Repair, run by the same family for 3 generations, had closed permanently the month before. Peterson's Hardware, where every man in town had bought his tools and supplies for 40 years, was having a going-out-of-business sale that would end the following week. The dominoes were falling, and Hank could no longer pretend that his shop would somehow be immune to the forces reshaping his beloved town. At exactly 10 a.m., as had been his custom for 4 decades, 83-year-old Mr. Peterson pushed through the door of Wilson Barber Shop. Peterson had been Hank's customer longer than anyone else still alive, a man who remembered when Main Street was the beating heart of Millbrook's social and commercial life. His hair, now completely white and thin as spider silk, required more care than cutting, but the weekly appointment was about far more than grooming. "Morning, Hank," Peterson said, settling into the familiar chair with the careful movements of advanced age. "The usual, if you please." Hank draped the cloth around Peterson's shoulders and picked up his scissors, but something felt different. For the first time in 5 decades of professional barbering, his hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear or nervousness, it was the physical manifestation of an emotional weight he could no longer carry. "You feeling all right today, Hank?" Peterson asked, noticing the subtle change in his barber's usually steady demeanor. "I'm fine, Mr. Peterson," Hank replied, focusing on controlling his hands. "Just got a lot on my mind lately. Anything you want to talk about?" Hank paused in his cutting, looking at Peterson's reflection in the mirror. This man had trusted him with his appearance every week for 40 years. He'd shared stories about his children, his grandchildren, his late wife, his health concerns, his hopes and fears. Peterson had been there through every phase of Hank's civilian life, offering support, friendship, and unwavering loyalty. He deserved honesty. "Mr. Peterson," Hank said slowly, "I've been thinking it might be time for me to close the shop." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Peterson's eyes widened in the mirror, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. "Close the shop? Hank, you can't be serious." "I'm afraid I am. Look around, Mr. Peterson. Look at Main Street. Everything's changing, and there's no place left for guys like me. But you're an institution, Hank. You're part of what makes this town special." "I used to be," Hank replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "But institutions can become obsolete. Maybe it's time I faced that reality." When the haircut was finished, and Peterson had paid his usual $15 plus tip, the elderly customer lingered by the door as if leaving might make Hank's decision final. "Promise me, you'll think about this some more before you do anything permanent," Peterson said. "This town needs you, Hank, maybe more than you realize. At 12:30 p.m., Emma Clarke pushed through the door. At 28, she represented everything that was changing about Millbrook, but in the best possible way. She was part of a small but growing wave of young professionals who were choosing small-town life over big-city careers, drawn by affordable housing, authentic community connections, and the chance to make a real difference in a place where individual contributions actually mattered. She had arrived in Millbrook just 18 months earlier, fresh from a journalism degree at Northwestern, and 5 years cutting her teeth as a general assignment reporter for the Chicago Tribune. The fast pace, endless deadlines, and impersonal nature of big-city journalism had left her feeling disconnected from the human stories that had drawn her to the profession in the first place. When the Millbrook Gazette offered her a position as their primary feature writer, she saw an opportunity to rediscover why she'd fallen in love with storytelling. Emma was the kind of journalist who noticed details others missed, the way people's hands moved when they were nervous, the photographs they chose to display, the stories hidden in the spaces between words. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light when she moved, intelligent green eyes that seemed to see everything at once, and an infectious enthusiasm for uncovering the extraordinary elements of seemingly ordinary lives. "Hello, Mr. Wilson," Emma said as she entered, immediately struck by the shop's atmosphere. "I'm Emma Clarke from the Millbrook Gazette. I'm working on a story about the changes happening on Main Street, and I was hoping to get your perspective on how things have evolved over the years." Hank looked up from where he'd been organizing his tools, studying this young woman who had just walked into his sanctuary. She had the alert, curious expression of someone genuinely interested in what she might learn, not the rushed impatience of someone just trying to get through a task. "I'm not sure I'd have much to add to your story, Miss Clarke," Hank replied with characteristic modesty. "I'm just an old barber watching his business slowly disappear. Not exactly front-page material, but that's exactly why your perspective is valuable," Emma insisted, pulling out a small notebook. "You've been here since 1952, right? You've witnessed the entire evolution of this community. That kind of institutional memory is irreplaceable." As Emma spoke, her trained journalist's eye was cataloging everything about the shop, the vintage equipment, the carefully maintained cleanliness, the obvious pride Hank took in his work despite the challenging circumstances. But what really captured her attention were the photographs covering nearly every inch of wall space. Most were exactly what you'd expect in a barber shop. Customers posing with fresh haircuts, groups of friends preparing for important events, families marking milestones. But scattered among these typical small-town memories were images that seemed different somehow, more formal, more serious, pictures of young men in uniforms that looked distinctly military. One photograph drew her focus: soldiers in Vietnam-era gear posed in front of jungle tents. Despite decades of aging, the facial structure of the center soldier was unmistakable. The same jawline, shoulders, steady gaze. "Mr. Wilson, this photograph, is that from Vietnam?" Hank glanced at the image, his composure slipping. "Yes, from a long time ago. And the soldier in the center, is that you?" The question hung between them like a bridge spanning decades. For 50 years Hank had deflected such inquiries, but Emma's respectful approach made evasion impossible. "Yes, that's me. Which unit were you with?" "1st Cavalry Division, Vietnam, 1968 to 1969. Emma's instincts engaged. She'd interviewed enough veterans to recognize someone carrying untold stories. The careful photographs, the respectful distance from memories, the obvious care in preservation. This suggested more than standard military service. Looking closer, she noticed ceremonial occasions, medal presentations, dress uniform awards. "Mr. Wilson, is that a Silver Star?" The silence was pregnant with unspoken history. Silver Stars represented extraordinary courage under fire, heroism most people only read about. "What did you do to earn it?" After long hesitation, Hank began. "March 23, 1969, Tay Ninh Province, near the Cambodian border. 12 of us on reconnaissance patrol. Lieutenant Morrison from Ohio, Billy Martinez from Texas, our radio operator, Jerry Sullivan from Boston, our medic." His eyes grew distant. "The ambush came at 13:47 hours. Complete surround, horseshoe formation. First burst took down Morrison. Second got Billy, dead instantly. Without radio contact we were cut off. No support, no communication. 47 enemy fighters, 10 of us left, half wounded." "How do you know exactly 47? "I counted them. Training taught us accurate intelligence meant survival." Hank walked to the window. "By 1800 hours, we wouldn't survive the night. I was demolition specialist. At 2200 hours, I told Sergeant Davis I'd try something. I left our perimeter. You left your unit. Crawled 3 hours through thick jungle. Enemy had a command post 800 meters away. Ammunition, communications, supplies. I spent an hour studying guard rotations, identifying targets, then used C4 charges to construct improvised explosives. You went into their camp alone. At 03:47 hours, I penetrated their perimeter. Took 47 minutes to place charges at strategic locations. The explosions were significant. In the chaos, I coordinated evacuation of our wounded. 11 men made it home, everyone except Billy. Emma felt tears forming. You saved 11 lives. I did what needed to be done, what any soldier would have done. But the Silver Star. Medals don't bring back friends. They don't stop nightmares. They're just metal reminding you of the worst day of your life. Emma understood the weight of survivors' guilt, the complexity of being recognized for actions during tragedy. People should know what you did. They should understand who you really are. That chapter is closed. Those stories belong to men who didn't make it home. But you're closing this shop because you think the community doesn't value you. What if they knew the truth? After much persistence, Hank reluctantly agreed Emma could write the story, provided it remained respectful. That evening, Emma crafted Millbrook's hidden hero, the Silver Star recipient who's been cutting our hair for 50 years. The article ran Thursday morning, was shared online by noon, picked up by Louisville Courier-Journal by evening, and trending on social media by Friday. Wednesday morning, over 20 people waited outside Hank's shop, old customers, new faces, everyone wanting to talk to the war hero who'd lived quietly among them. Hank, I read the paper. I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say? Nothing to say. You're a war hero. All day the shop filled and emptied. Everyone wanted to talk, but Hank just cut hair. At noon, Mayor Miller arrived, the same man who'd criticized the shop as outdated a week earlier. Mr. Wilson, I came to apologize. I didn't know who you were. I'm the same man, but you're a heroic veteran. I was the same man yesterday. Only difference is, now you know. Miller was amazed by this humility. We could declare this shop a historic site. I don't want tourists. I just want to cut hair. Thursday, Veterans Affairs called. We've reviewed your file. Some medals were never processed. We're conducting re-evaluation. Saturday brought unexpected visitors, 3 elderly men in military uniform. Sergeant Wilson. Nobody had called him by rank in 50 years. Yes, Colonel Richards, retired. We're Vietnam veterans. We heard your story. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. The 1969 operation in Tay Ninh was one of the most courageous individual actions in the Vietnam War. We're here to present you with the Medal of Honor. Emma felt tears. Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. Hank sank into his chair. I just did my job. No, Sergeant. You saved 11 American lives. You deserve this recognition. The ceremony was held Sunday in the town square. All of Millbrook came, hundreds from surrounding towns. Colonel Richards spoke. Sergeant Henry Wilson, through extraordinary courage on March 23, 1969, saved 11 soldiers' lives. Though 50 years late, this hero receives deserved recognition. When Hank took the podium, the town applauded for minutes. Thank you. But remember, the real heroes never made it home. I'm just here in their memory. Wilson Barber Shop became the heart not just of Millbrook, but the entire region. No longer just a barber shop, a veterans meeting place, historic site, source of pride. Hank still opens at 7:30 every day. The difference is, now there's a line waiting. On the wall, beside old photos, the Medal of Honor certificate hangs with pride. Emma wrote her follow-up, how one simple question changed a town. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the quietest ones. For 50 years they live among us, serving without expecting anything. All we need to do is ask, is that person in this photo you? Hank no longer thinks about closing the shop. The town really needs him, not just as a barber, but as a reminder that real heroes are always among us. We just need to learn to notice them. With each haircut, he looks in the mirror and smiles. He's learned that age doesn't kill heroism, it just hides it, until someone asks the right question. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and hit the notification bell to be the first to know about more inspiring content. And remember that wisdom comes in many forms, and the person you overlooked today might be the hero you need tomorrow.